Hello everyone. So with the release of the Freedom style, which was around a month ago, there has been a style that got a buff, but despite this buff, nobody uses it. And that is the Kimura style. The buff it got was something new regarding his slow debuff. What was new about the buffed Kimura is that he now has the ability to sustain the slowness debuff by hitting blocking opponents. If you do not know what sustain is, it's basically you being able to let the slowness debuff stay on your opponent for a little longer. So if you want to let your opponent be constantly slowed, you are forced to play aggressive with Kimura, to make sure your opponent will never be able to remove the slow debuff on them. That was not the only thing that Kimura had that got buffed as well. His M1 damage also got a significant damage buff. With it you can kind of lower your opponent's guard or block a lot more often, which ties in with how you are supposed to use Kimura. Before I show some gameplay, I will be explaining how you should use Kimura as well as tips if you do actually want to main or devote yourself with this style. Or you might just want to beat players with a low tier style. But hey, whatever makes you happy. Alright, first things first. Kimura's entire gimmick is his ability to slow your opponent down with any of his attacks. Yes, by every attack. I meant every attack he throws, meaning it can applied with both his M1s and M2s. I do not know if Kimura's dose of slow varies depending on the attack. But let's just assume both attacks will deal the same amount of slow every time. So your main source of slow will always be your M1s. I did some testing and the only way your slow will apply to your opponent is if you hit them when they are not blocking. So your main goal with Kimura is to land a lot of M1s when they are not blocking. Well, how do you achieve this? There are around 3 ways to apply this debuff consistently. But if I did miss some, feel free to comment them down below. On is by simply poking them with your M1s, like throwing out simple M1s to catch your opponents. Contrary to popular belief, the first M1 does in fact apply slow. And if applied enough, will cripple your opponent if they are not careful. Next way is what Kimura in the anime actually does, and that is the step-in strategy. This strategy can be used by any style, but I feel like Kimura is the one that is going to get the most value for using it. How the step-in works, is basically you utilizing the forward dash to punish a whiffed M1, since Kimura's M1 range is pretty bad. You have to rely on the step-in to constantly be in your opponent's face landing M1 after M1. If you keep repeating this process, your opponent will probably have their block health low almost every time. And if they have their block low, they are forced to take the slow applying M1s to avoid a block break, crippling them on the spot. And the last one, that I think is what people should do if they are going for the slow, is M1 instead of M2 if they perfect dodged. You can land around 2 to 3 M1s during a perfect dodge. And just applying 3 M1s with Kimura when they are not blocking, you can apply a decent amount of slow to the enemy. But if you are going for damage instead, you can throw out an M2 instead. Now, why is applying the slow debuff so important for Kimura? Because the debuffs it can apply is actually pretty scary. And so far, only Kimura and Kimura alone is able to apply a large dose of this debuff. Here is a full list of what the slow effect can do to your opponent, and as you can see, these are debuffs that your opponent does not want to experience. Now for Kimura's downsides. As you can see from what I've said, Kimura's entire gimmick is him applying slow. And how it's very reliant on you playing aggressively. You have to play aggressive with Kimura to make your opponent be constantly slowed or to make them have low block health consistently for them to be forced to tank the slow applying M1s to avoid a guard break. And as you already know, playing aggressively in this game is such a gamble. Because you are vulnerable to counters and perfect dodges. And the sad thing about Kimura too, is that Kimura has a lot of counterplay. One is for opponent to stall away your slow by simply using slow M1s to wait for your slow debuff to disappear. Because while Kimura got sustain and a damage buff on M1s, the slow debuff does actually drop faster, making it disappear rather quickly if they decide to run away or if they just stall your slow with slow M1s. So if you are fighting an overly passive player, applying slow will be very hard because it will be a lot harder for you to keep their block on low health. And Kimura's attacks does also make it harder to land attacks with it, because both his M1s and M2s are relatively slow, and his M2 always comes from one side, making it easier to perfect dodge. Do not get me wrong, Kimura is decent. But his gimmick is such a hard thing to set up that not a lot of players can fully utilize it. And the fact that despite Kimura needing a lot of setting up to apply the slow debuff, the slow debuff itself fades away pretty quick, making all of Kimura's efforts useless. And did you know, if you get knocked down, or if you knock down your opponent, while the timer is counting for you or them to stand up, The slow debuff you applied fades away during that countdown. So most of the time when you or they stand back up again, you are back on square one. Yeah, that's the Kimura style. In my opinion they really should make the slow last longer. And maybe that will make Kimura usable. But as of right now, you are better off with using someone like Ippo or Smash if you are relying on step in and M1s to deal damage. Since you get more value if you are using these two. Anyways, here is some gameplay of me using the buffed Kimura.
完璧なタイミングだ。受けやがれ。